quarter of a mile, turn right onto Lee Road. Turn right onto Lee Road.
In terms of local policing and raising this with the Chief Constable.
The Home Secretary says there'll be an investigation. How on earth was somebody like Davison, who'd been stripped of his gun licence previously?
In a quarter of a mile, turn right onto Farnham Road, A355.
These sorts of people are amongst us.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 7 o'clock, hundreds of people have gathered for a tearful vigil in Plymouth in memory of 5 people killed in a shooting in the city. A 3-year-old girl, her dad and the gunman's mum were among those who died on Thursday evening in the Keyham area. Kev Boston organised last night's event.
The Keyham community are...
Take the next right onto Farnham Road, A355.
The community spirit here has always been really, really strong. Everyone's coming out here, and even people that can't make it are actually putting candles out on their doorsteps.
22-year-old Jake Davison took his own life after the shooting. The police watchdogs to investigate the Devon and Cornwall force over his possession of a shotgun and a firearms licence.
Continue on Farnham Road for half a mile.
After being taken off him in September last year, following an allegation of assault. Home Secretary Priti Patel says there'll be many lines of inquiry.
When it comes to firearm licensing, that is absolutely what the police oversee. And clearly we'll be asking questions, definitely, in terms of local policing and raising this with the Chief Constable.
Books of condolence have been set up in Plymouth for people to sign. Sir Keir Starmer is urging the Prime Minister to seek an urgent meeting of the United Nations Security Council to discuss the worsening situation in Afghanistan. The Labour leader says the country is facing the prospects of a humanitarian crisis which requires a joined-up international response to support the Afghan government. A man's been taken to hospital.
In a quarter of a mile, turn left onto Bath Road, A4.
Police say they were called to the scene just after 7 last night. COVID tests needed for international travel are coming down in price. They're now £68, down from 88 for people arriving from green-listed countries and those double vaccinated from amber nations. It's after
Take the next left onto Bath Road, A4.
people heading on holiday. And Brentford manager Thomas Frank says the memories from last night's Premier League win against Arsenal will live forever. The club marked their return to English football's top
Continue on A4 for 1 mile.
years with a 2-0 win in front of a full crowd in West London. The weather, cloud and patchy rain across northern England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, largely dry elsewhere, a high of 23 degrees. From Global's newsroom, I'm Rebecca Cook.
You coming?
It's gonna be good.
Come on, mate. Come on, let's go. Don't miss out on your 2 COVID jabs. Don't miss out on the good times. Over 2/3 of 18 to 30-year-olds have already had their first COVID jab. It's easy, and there's plenty of ways to get yours done quickly. Visit nhs.uk/COVID vaccination to book yours now, or to find your nearest walk-in centre. Come on then, don't miss out.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Andrew Castle.
And a very good morning to you. It's 3 minutes past 7. Andrew Castle here. Saturday the 14th of August. Still more questions than answers after the events of Plymouth that have left 5 people dead. And a 6th, the shooter taking his own life, this Jake Davison. Now, I'm going to start by sharing something with you. I don't want to talk about this bloke either. All right. I don't want to see him on the front page or the middle pages of the newspapers. I don't really want to utter his name ever again, but that's not realistic journalistically, and it's not realistic given how close we are to what happened time-wise. It was only on Thursday that the first calls came into the police at 6:11. They were there by 6:16. We were hearing from the Chief Constable Sean Sawyer down in the Devon and Cornwall Police. So listen, we are going to be talking about Jake Davison, 22-year-old who killed his mother and 4 others, including Sophie Martin, the 3-year-old. We are going to be naming him. You're going to open up your papers today, if you still take a paper. We're going to be going online to consume the media, and you're going to see his image. You'll probably see his videos as well. Now, I'm sorry, that is a fact of life, so there's no point us trying to deny it. I mean, the quicker we sort of don't talk about him anymore, the better, but it's very important that we learn what we can in a situation like this, and no doubt the story throughout the course of the day, and even perhaps during the course of this program, will move on according to your calls, because we do need to know how a license and a firearm that were taken away from him were then returned to him. What is that process? We don't actually know whether the gun that he used was the one that he had a license for. I did try to establish that yesterday, but I don't think a pump-action shotgun is a legally held weapon. But many of you on the text yesterday, when I was in, yesterday morning, said it is. So some confusion, and the questions will move on. But first, let's just get the very latest on what happened on Thursday evening. A terrible tragedy unfolded. James Goodison is LBC's reporter with more. James, morning.
Andrew, we are beginning to learn more and more about the gunman who shot dead 5 people on Thursday as the days go on. The key focus now is on why the 22-year-old Jake Davison was given back his confiscated gun and permit last month after being stripped of it in December last year when he was accused of assault. The Independent Office for Police Conduct is investigating that following a mandatory referral from the Devon and Cornwall Police. It would also look at whether the force had any information about the shooter's mental health and if any such information was appropriately considered. It is, of course, not yet known whether this was the particular weapon that was used in the attack. Last night, mourners broke down in tears as hundreds laid flowers and candles in a park in the Kian area to pay their respects. We now know among the victims were Jake Davison's own mother and a 3-year-old girl. Prior to the shooting, Davison had taken to the internet, making references to incels in some social media videos. His YouTube channel subscribed to an account called Incel TV. His account has since been deactivated. Incels is an online subculture. It's short for involuntary celibacy. It's made up of men who hold resentment and hostility towards women, blaming them for their sexual failings. Davison did not label himself as such, but did talk about people similar to himself who have nothing but themselves. He also posted hate-filled raps about single mothers and his own mother, who've been called vile and dysfunctional. This is the worst mass shooting in Britain since 2010. Police aren't treating it as terror-related. On the ground at the moment, officers continue to investigate 13 scenes within a cordon.
In a quarter of a mile, at the roundabout, take the first exit onto Wellington Street, A4.
Some of the detail there, 7 minutes past 7. Will Geddes is a counter-terrorism and security expert. Will, good morning to you. This is not being considered terrorism, but of course it terrorised everybody and continues to do so as the details emerge. What is terrorism if this is not it?
Yeah, no, it's a really good point, Andrew. I mean, the definition of terrorism, obviously in its traditional sense, would look at, obviously, actions and intimidations to influence government policy and positions. But terrorism has become much more ground level these days, and one could say that this potentially falls into this category, but I would try and steer away from it because I think terrorism has a place of its own. This, however, is
Exit the roundabout onto Wellington Street. Continue on A4 for 2 miles.
There is this particular concern about firearms officers and licence officers obviously returning this firearm to this individual.
Yes, I mean, obviously that's where the story is going to go today, and there are questions to be answered. But you know, it's how these sorts of people amongst us, in how many numbers we don't know, would do damage like this, and would be either tipped or driven or motivated to act in this way, and what we can actually do to stop it in the future.
Yeah, now this is a really, really good point, Andrew, and I think one of the things that's concerned me greatly is a lot of the people have been leaning towards mental health issues, and I think that is actually, again, kind of dangerous, because in many regards, and certainly the statistics that I've seen, people who are suffering from mental health issues are more likely to be at risk for violence rather than be the perpetrators. But in terms of trying to cut off and isolate and identify individuals like this person, the concerns have to draw back to, unfortunately, and again, it is again and again and again, is in terms of the materials which are on the web that potentially motivate those within our community that are isolated, are looking for something to hook themselves onto and to use as some kind of driving force behind them, amplifying their dissatisfaction, how disgruntled they are, how unhappy they are with society.
Indeed. Listen, Will, good to speak with you. Thank you. Will Gomez, a counter-terrorism and security expert. Caitlin Reguera is with us, senior lecturer in media and digital culture at the University of Kent, who studied the behaviour of online incel groups. Caitlin Reguera, thank you very much indeed for joining us. A lot of people wouldn't have heard of incel before. How many people are involved in this movement? Is it an organised movement? What can you tell us?
Right, so Incel is an online community of primarily young men in their late teens and early 20s who feel rejected by women and actually popular society in general, and take the internet to voice their feelings of frustration and at times desires for revenge, and on very rare occasions there will be some individuals who take those desires for revenge quite literally and move that violence off screens and onto streets.
Right. Thank you for that. So these are primarily young men, teens, early 20s, with a grievance, who are involuntary celibates. So, in other words, they're not having sex, they're not in a relationship, and they're talking to each other.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So they feel left out. They feel that they're isolated. They feel that society has let them down and has kind of forgotten them. And what happens and this is of course amplified by our smartphone era, right? We still don't yet know the full implications of us all scrolling through our phones, watching our friends have fun without us. You know, I think we all, to a certain extent, have a certain amount of fear of missing out. In the incel community, that is completely amplified, and they become fixated on this sense of missing out on parties, of missing out on developmental milestones, and the real fixation is on relationships and sexual relationships.
Of course it is, because that's the age where, you know, personally, for me, that was the age where, it was an overwhelming set of feelings and emotions and desires. Of course it was, and more powerful in some than others. Caitlin, you are making, I cannot tell you how much sense you're making. People scrolling through their phones, looking at other people's lives, and then being backed up.
Which are often, filtered and fictitious lives.
It's nonsense. Yeah. Instagram is
and then
nonsense.
you need to layer often in this community, large consumptions of pornography use as well, right?
I said this yesterday to people who were offended that I said it.
In a quarter of a mile, at Langley Roundabout, take the first exit onto the M4 slip road to M25, London.
And violent. It's not like porn online is not like, you know, loving sexual relationships all the time, right? It's just everywhere, and it's violent, and it's no good at all.
Yeah, and so I think that, pornography is is sex performed for camera savvy angles. It's not real sex. And very sadly, we have young people who are consuming large dosage of pornography, years and years before they would have a normative sexual relationship. That is just the reality that we're living in with the digital space. In some instances, this is taken to the extreme, right? And there is anger and resentment. So I think if you layer pornography on top of this fear of missing out, and then you also need to take into account that many members of this community are individuals who just don't quite fit in. There are high levels of neurodiversity within this community. They feel left out. They just don't seem to be gelling with these groups. They often have been bullied at a young age. And instead of having community-embedded programming that kind of supports these individuals, they find the digital space. They find themselves down these internet wormholes. And this becomes their community. This becomes their support. And there's almost an addictive quality because it feels good, because they have friends in that space. And they have,
Exit the roundabout onto the slip road.
target to vent their anger and frustration.
So they're utterly reinforced.
In a quarter of a mile, merge onto M4.
Which they have gone out and sold. It's been happening in front of us for. This is the first generation. He was 22 years of age. This is the first generation that has grown up entirely with the internet. It is the real world. It is oxygen and water to these sorts of people.
And you're absolutely right. And the other
Continue on M4 for 5 miles.
all the way through lockdown, I said we're going to see another attack as soon as we open up, because not only have you made young people more isolated during this period, but a tremendous amount of time on the line to all of the issues of digital space that we have been concerned about as researchers, that we have seen amplified during this period. So it is, I am so sad to be right about this.
In 2 miles, at junction 3, take the A312 exit to Harrow, Hayes. In a quarter of a mile, at junction 3, take the A312 exit to Harrow, Hayes. Exit at junction 3. In a quarter of a mile, at Cranford Parkway interchange, take the 3rd exit onto the Parkway, A312.
Was established. He was got at finally in 2011 in Abbottabad in Pakistan, and we got him. Well, what is it going to come to if the Taliban go back into Afghanistan? Will they now have a base which they will use to attack the West once again? What will happen to people who seek to leave their country because Taliban are another level? We know what happens. We don't need to be graphic. Now we know, we've seen it. And what of the impact of those who are left behind, the civilian population? We've just given up. I asked a question yesterday and I wasn't sure how service personnel would have viewed the question because I felt it was slightly vulgar. And I still do, but I don't know what else to ask.
Exit the roundabout onto the Parkway.
You say that when there are 457 people who didn't come home, thousands more injured.
Continue on the Parkway for 1 mile.
Let's turn to Ash Alexander, a former British Army colonel who served 8 tours of Afghanistan and is a former senior advisor to the Ministry of Interior Affairs in Afghanistan. Ash, very nice to speak with you. Good morning and welcome.
Morning, Andrew. Thank you.
Can I ask you your thoughts, because you were at the very forefront over there. You had friends injured, you yourself were injured. So as Afghanistan's story has developed and we've seen
quarter of a mile, at Wagoners Roundabout, take the second exit and stay on the Parkway, A312.
In touch with your contacts, friends, former colleagues, perhaps Afghan friends.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even just overnight before speaking to you, I've been trying to catch up on emails and text messages received overnight from people, some of whom are the lucky ones who've been told that they will potentially be relocated by the UK back with their families to be safe, but they're now in hiding because the process and because the situation is so fluid. They are now in hiding because assassinations are increasing in Kabul.
Exit the roundabout onto the Parkway.
Sadly,
Continue on A312 for 1.5 miles.
the most at risk because they didn't play the game, and they're seen to be the legitimate targets for those who want to root out those that might still be west-leaning or have links to the west. So yeah, I'm inundated, as are many of my colleagues, British colleagues and American colleagues, with current friends but former colleagues in the country who are crying out for help because they're terrified for them and their families.
And what can you do to help them? What can we do to help them? Are the UK government doing enough to help those who helped our effort?
I mean, there are significant changes that have happened recently. The Defence Secretary and others have made some changes to increase the eligibility of those who are seeking to be relocated, interpreters and others, and that's very, very welcome. But I think that the challenge now is that the pace of the situation unfolding, the rate of advance by the Taliban, mean that the timeline is collapsing, and we just need to move faster, because the risk is that even people who've been accepted into the program, like this friend who emailed overnight, they still risk being left behind or missing the boat or the plane in reality, because it's just not happening quickly enough. So I think the government is moving, but we all need to move faster. So people, if anybody listening wants to get involved and keep the pressure up, then please lobby your MPs to make sure that they understand that this is something that we care about, because there is a sense of betrayal and abandonment from many in the country who gave everything for us and feel like now is the time to reciprocate.
Are we talking about interpreters? Are we talking about fixers, people who will get a car when it was required, actors, guides? Who are we talking about? What sort of jobs did they do for us?
I mean, there's a variety of jobs that are listed as allowing people to be eligible for the ARAP program, as it is referred to here in the UK, and it does primarily focus on interpreters, those who are out mixing with the populations and their faces being seen and obviously being very, very overtly seen to support the West and the UK. But there are others in key leadership positions. We worked with many absolutely brilliant and loyal and professional police and soldiers and others whose families are significantly at risk now. One of my friends, he was told originally that his family could be relocated with him, but only those children under 18, and he has a number of children who are just over 18, and he was told that you can come with your minor child, but all those adult children you have to leave behind. It's a possible decision for any parents have to make. Thankfully, that is being reviewed, and many of the cases are being reviewed, but as I said, we just need to move quickly because the situation is deteriorating fast in some of these areas.
So our government putting parents into a position of Sophie's choice, choose a child. In effect, I mean, that's probably a dramatic way of putting it, but I mean, that's incredible.
And this is obviously an impossible decision for any parent to have to make, but hopefully we'll be able to get some of these things resolved.
And Ash, you yourself were injured, weren't you? Forgive me if I'm prying into an area that I shouldn't, but I'm quite intrigued as to how you got through that period and how you've been treated subsequently.
Well, my injuries, compared to so many who suffered devastating and life-changing injuries in a really major way, mine are very minor. I've lost feeling in a leg from losing a nerve from an attack that went on for quite a long time. A few bits and pieces that are annoying and inconvenient to me, but compared to many others who've lost limbs and suffer mental health challenges from their service, I'm one of the lucky ones. I think clearly our focus needs to be on the Afghan people currently, but I think there is another issue that we must be mindful of, and that is...
In a quarter of a mile, turn right onto Roslyn Avenue.